Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. I get to officially say it's afternoon because it's 12 o'clock. So good afternoon. And we're happy that you came out and excited that we get to have another session of our One World, many different faiths. And this is an opportunity for us to kind of really learn and get some insight into some areas and belief traditions, thought traditions that we had not previously maybe studied too deeply into. Even if we have, to hear from a specific person sharing from their perspective, I think is very powerful and so and beneficial for all of us. My name is Christian Taylor. I am one of our board of directors at Interfaith Council of Central Florida. I work with Advent Health in our mission and ministry area, and I'm so excited to work with Interfaith Council because we have opportunities like this that we can grow, learn, and find our ways that we may hold things in common, and then also find ways that we don't hold things in common and be able to learn to respect those and to appreciate those differences. And so we're happy again that you came out. We have a special guest for this one. We are featuring Miss Jocelyn Williamson. She is a lifelong atheist and humanist, and she serves as the president of the Florida Humanist Association, and she's also the co-founder of the Central Florida Freethought Community. CFFC, Central Florida Freethought Community, is a 501c3 nonprofit organization of freethinkers, humanists, atheists, and secularists working and playing together with reason and compassion as guiding principles. I just love that it also said working and playing together in those ways. She is a humanist celebrant, represents humanism on the Interfaith Council of Central Florida. She's also on the national board of the Humanist Society and serves on several national boards in support of the atheist and humanist movements across the country. Jocelyn is a university business instructor, and prior to working in education, she worked in international marketing. She's been in Central Florida, more or less, since the late 1980s, and I was just getting to know a little bit more of her background, and she's traveled around quite a bit, and we're here to have her talk today about her perspective, secular humanism. Help me welcome Jocelyn Williamson.
Thank you. Good afternoon, since we are officially in the afternoon. I'm Jocelyn Williamson, and I want to talk to you today about how I account for my values and ethics and the labels I use to describe myself, but also the way in which my beliefs inform my views on many things about life, community, and the world around us. Some people might think this would answer the question, what is your religion? But I think it answers far more than that. Also, I want to say that everything I'm going to be talking about today is my own journey. It's my own opinion. I don't speak on behalf of others or on behalf of any organization. Not because I'm afraid I'm going to get it wrong, but because I want to establish that everyone thinks about these things differently. First, though, a little bit about myself. I'm a daughter, a citizen, a wife, a mother, a third-generation atheist. My parents and grandparents from Iowa were atheists too. The label atheist means I don't claim to know that there are any gods. I simply don't accept, in other words, I don't believe that a God exists. And that's what I don't believe. I identify affirmatively as a secular humanist, since that speaks to what I do believe. And I believe in many things: friendship, compassion, service, love, leaving the world a better place. This is the only world we've got, and this is the only life we have to live. My parents, I think, set some good examples for me. My father worked in nonprofit fundraising for most of my life. My mother taught high school English in public high school her entire life. They have lived their lives in service to the community. I spent much of my time growing up in our community working to make it a better place with my parents. I've spent time overseas and was visibly an ethnic minority in both countries I spent the most time in. This made me a visible religious minority as well. In both places, I was exposed to cultures that broadened my appreciation for the pluralism some are struggling with here in the US today. For a little over 2 years, I was working in Japan. The Japanese were primarily Shinto and Buddhist, and the Japanese government respects this right in practice. At all levels, the Japanese government seeks to protect this right in full and does not tolerate its abuse by either governmental or private sectors. For a little over 3 years, I was in the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. I worked as a school administrator. I also worked in international marketing. And the Turkish Cypriots were very much like we are here today, of one religion, but the religion was Islam. I quickly learned that in Cyprus, the Turkish side, mind you, was actually less religious than Japan. The constitution of the Northern Cypriot country protects religious freedom, and it states that Northern Cyprus is a secular state. Fortunately, I had good experiences in both places, being embedded in workplaces and social circles while I was there, but I truly appreciate how those experiences have shaped me. Like other people, I struggle with my mortality. I'm getting older. I strive to maintain my morality and have the same human desires and human values as others. I may simply ascribe those values to a different cause or source. On a day-to-day basis, I think a lot about how to seek out, how to spread happiness, kindness, service. As my father said, be excellent to other people. And I do that, not in spite of what I believe, but because of it. When I think about what I believe philosophically, I realize that while I am an atheist, as it relates to the God claims that religious people have, secular humanism is a better description of my perspective on the things that matter to me and in my life. I even think of it as the values that all humans share, regardless of how they attribute them. I personally generally approach life with a live and let live outlook. For me, being a humanist is living at the intersection of love and reason. It is showing compassion and living a life of integrity. It is also making decisions utilizing my freedom of thought, or free thought for short. I use the word free thought to mean forming opinions about religion on the basis of reason, free from tradition, free from authority, and established beliefs. And when I do this objectively, I don't find a compelling reason to believe in religious claims as they relate to God or spirituality in a supernatural sense. Whether God exists or not, I'm simply unconvinced of that, and I don't see the value of taking it on faith. I believe there is no obvious purpose to the universe. It is a natural phenomenon with no design behind it. Meaning and purpose for me is not something waiting to be discovered or given to me on high, meaning it is something created by me and shaped by my experiences. As I was growing up, if you had asked me about religion, I would have just said, I don't believe in God. Now I use all the different labels. You may have heard, it kind of depends on how the question is asked. Asked if I'm religious, I would say no. Or if given a list of religions, I would answer none of the above. If pressed, I'll say I'm an atheist. When asked what my religion is, I probably say I'm a humanist, because I'm making some assumptions about why that question is being asked. But let's talk about humanism in particular, including how humanist organizations and other humanists define it, because I think that's a good starting point. But also more specifically, we'll talk about what humanism means to me. Humanism is described by some as a personal philosophy. It can be referred to as an ethical life stance or even a system of beliefs, but can also answer the question, what is your religion? Not because it's a religious perspective, but because of the assumption that ethics must be based in religious belief. And I'll talk more about that misconception later. Unfortunately, as it is with so many labels, including religious labels, isms often just help others confirm their stereotypes. Humanism is a philosophy people tend to adopt and mold to their own needs. There is no one right way to practice humanism, but there are certainly some things that I and others would consider antithetical to humanist values as I understand them. And I've learned from my friends in the Interfaith Council and elsewhere that this is also the case for religious sects and denominations as well. Even in the same congregation, not all adherents describe the religious beliefs they share the same way. In fact, I see much of what I would describe as humanist values in other religious traditions. And that reminds me that when we talk about the values we attribute to our own faith perspective, we should remember that neither ourselves nor our tradition are the only ones that espouse these values. I definitely see humanist values in people who don't think of themselves as humanists, and that's fine. I'm not going to relabel anybody a humanist. However, humanism is an organic and evergreen personal philosophy, not a directed one, as is often the case with traditional religious beliefs, meaning that it arises everywhere there are humans. We can come to understand humanist values on our own by thinking about the world, ourselves, other people, and our place in it. And that's why humanism has been rediscovered by individuals all over the world constantly and doesn't always have the same label. In fact, I was surprised, and I will say very flattered, to see that the Webster Online Dictionary found that everything you see on this slide were considered synonyms for humanism. So, what's the purpose of life according to this philosophy? Well, to be happy. Simply to live our lives and to be happy, but never at the expense of others. The thinking is that this is the only life we have that we can be sure of, so we might as well make the best of it for ourselves, for those we love, but also by extension for others. Some extend this to non-human animals in their ethical choices around diet. Recall that this ethic is also shared by some religious sects as well, right? Think Jains, Hindus, Seventh-day Adventists, and others. Some are more observant, but there are both religious and secular values that call us not to harm animals. I am not a vegetarian, but I can really understand the natural extension of deference to non-human animals because of the harm done when they are part of our diet. And it's how we go about being happy that really does make all the difference. Humanism has a multifaceted approach to the task of living life productively and happily. This approach incorporates both a set of ethics and a methodology that humanists who've spent time on this field can yield the best results. Human ethics are based on the principle of harm, something that requires no supernatural divination or religious doctrine to understand. We define as good that which helps those affected. We define as bad that which harms those affected. We evaluate help and harm as it relates to people. And we extend that outward from ourselves, to family, to friends, to neighbors, to community, the world. I think we all fail, to some extent, to care about strangers on the other side of the planet as much as those very close to us. But this care and regard requires resources and commitment that might sometimes harm ourselves or at minimum reduce our own resources or security. So evolutionarily speaking, caring for those we don't know is harder to do and becomes less important to us by default than caring for the well-being of others near and dear to us. So the concepts of good and bad or good and evil are better described as help and harm. They are defined as commonly understood by most humans, but we should avoid ascribing those terms to people. I don't think people are good or bad, but the decisions we all can make can be good or bad. Actions and their consequences often have clearly determinable good or bad outcomes. It's sometimes harder to know though, right? And yes, people differ on what actions they consider to be good for themselves, and that's fine. We get to decide for ourselves, but again, not at the expense of harm to others. There are only a few absolutes in moral questions. Decisions we make are contextual, often made in different circumstances with different consequences each time we make them. And there are two aspects of this, individual and societal. Societally, we have to make some assumptions about how people want to be treated. This is why the Golden Rule, developed about 4,000 years ago, is so helpful. This is the concept of reciprocity, and this means we make a guess about how others want to be treated based on our own assumption that they want to be treated just like we do. And when we do that, we get it right most of the time, right? We share enough DNA and human values through shared cultural experience to understand the basics of harm, and we can make some generalizations and get it right, generally speaking, on bigger issues. But what if we could do it better? On an individual level, we can. Given the opportunity, we have the ability and should take the time to understand how others want to be treated. We simply need to ask instead of assuming we know what they want. With that new information, we can confirm it matches our own, or we can make decisions differently for different people to treat them how they would prefer. That's the platinum rule. Treat others the way they want to be treated, not the way you want to be treated. In a pluralistic society, in any society, we need to realize that we don't agree on everything. Okay, so some of this is a review of what I've just said, but in summary, humanists, like other people, use critical thinking, logic, and reason, because we understand that in order to actually solve problems, we need to know what is causing them. The more our understanding of a problem matches reality, the more effective our solution is going to be. Humanists accept naturalism, accept that the universe is a natural phenomena, that there is no second layer to reality or spiritual dimension. Scientific inquiry may not always get things 100% right, but I find religious answers unsatisfying and would rather not know than to have to accept something on someone else's word or in faith. In fact, when I was a kid growing up, I had questions about everything, and my parents encouraged me to ask questions, to have wonder about our world, to find out answers. And I practically lived at the local library when I was a kid. It was pre-internet. Humanists make their ethical decisions based on empathy and concern for human beings and other sentient creatures. And again, we do this to varying degrees based on several factors, as do people who make ethical decisions based on religious doctrine. Humanists believe that in the absence of an afterlife and any discernible purpose to the universe, human beings can act to give their own lives meaning by seeking happiness in this life and helping others to do the same. And humanists have accepted that this morality, what we with our conscious minds have called morality and developed as morality, was not something that was imported or divinely inspired by an external force. Rather, it is something that is itself an artifact of human beings' relationships with one another as a social species. It is something that is generated from our necessary interactions with us and the world around us. It is, as my father said, be excellent to other people. Be compassionate. Be who you want others to be to you. And humanists are people who believe that in the absence of any discernible purpose or trajectory to the universe, that it is human beings who can and should create purpose in our lives, in ourselves, and for one another. The word humanist itself started to have its present-day meaning at the end of the 19th century to describe a set of beliefs, values, and attitudes that already existed. And so to get us started, I'm going to share a few relatively recent humanists of note. Albert Einstein was the founding member of the First Humanist Society of New York. Helen Keller was a founding member as well. Carl Sagan was a member of the American Humanist Association. Writer and civil rights activist James Baldwin. Several well-known science fiction writers, Gene Roddenberry, Sir Arthur Clarke, Isaac Asimov, Clara Harlow Barton, a pioneering nurse who founded the American Red Cross, was also a humanist. So that's just a few you've probably heard of. But let's look further back in history at some of the folks who helped shape what is today modern humanism. One of humanism's most important attributes is that actually no single human came up with and codified humanism, writing it down and spreading it by edict. In the case, that's a little different if you compare it to other religions and philosophies. Humanism, its namesake, is not just one of us, it's all of us. Scholars disagree whether Confucianism should be considered a religion or a philosophy. This is a trend for non-theistic traditions like humanism, Buddhism, and others. But at Confucianism's core are humanist values. And for more than 2,500 years, a significant number of followers have had a moral code that had nothing to do with divine intervention and everything to do with prudential rules for governing social interaction. Confucianism focuses on the practical, especially the importance of family, not on the belief in the gods or the afterlife, or even consideration for the creation of earth or human life or the afterlife. We find these ideas at nearly the same time in the southernmost tip of India, where a school of materialists posited that this life is the only life we have. Lakhoita or Charvaka, the Indian materialism, refers to the school of thought that rejects supernaturalism, the existence of otherworldly entities, including the immaterial soul, God, and the afterlife. Its primary philosophical understanding comes by way of a scientific and naturalistic approach. The Charvakas didn't accept philosophical claims that couldn't be verified through direct experience. And the materialist emphasis on empirical validation of truth, this was actually the foundation of the scientific method that we have here today. In the 3rd century BCE, the Chinese philosopher Mencius wrote that the origin of morality was the social instinct within us. He wrote, "The feeling of commiseration is the beginning of humanity, and the feeling of shame and dislike is the beginning of righteousness," end quote. He made the case from observation and experience that the origin of morality, rather than coming from an external source, comes from within and living within a society. A humanist from the classical European period in the 2nd century is Marcus Aurelius, whose famous quote from Live a Good Life reads in summary, quote, "If there are just gods, they will welcome you based on the virtues you lived by. If there are unjust gods, then you should not want to worship them. If there are no gods, you will have lived a noble life that will live on in the memories of your loved ones," end quote. He made the case that we, people, all come from the same place and we're of the same race. He did not have the support, scientifically speaking, to show this, and was undermined at the time since there was no justifiable explanation or plausible mechanism to explain our differences of appearance. And these last three that I just covered, they posited a secular explanation for human life that didn't have the evidence it needed, but that was going to come later, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We find humanist ideas in the Arab world around the 12th century with the Andalusian Muslim polymath Averroes. Averroes was a defender of Aristotelian philosophy against theologians. His philosophy was considered controversial in Muslim circles, but he had a greater impact on Western European culture and has been described by some as, quote, "the founding father of secular thought in Western Europe." Latin translations of Averroes' work led the way to the popularization of Aristotle. They were responsible for the development of scholasticism in medieval Europe. Perhaps a more familiar example of the consideration of the connection of personal fulfillment and greater good was done by David Hume, a Scottish philosopher from the 1700s. Hume had been a major influence on American philosophy. He believed that morality was based on feelings of sympathy with other people, and that benevolence towards them, quote, "it will promote the interests of our species and bestow happiness on human society," end quote. And we'll take a detour just for a moment to point out something that makes humanism more powerful and appealing is its ability to adapt to scientific discoveries. No doctrine needs to be reshaped nor scriptures reinterpreted. The 19th century discovery of evolution as an explanation for the diversity of species that has been developed over millions of years, it increased the acceptance of humanism in scientific circles and beyond. The understanding that humans are not made in the image of a God, but are an ongoing process gives those who adopt a humanist perspective the answer to one of life's more interesting questions, where we came from. Actually, I would say it's who we came from, but it's a good question. And there are surely more existential questions to answer, but this was a big one. So humanism has been around for most of recorded history, though only very recently has it been called humanism. And that's because, as I showed you earlier, its concepts are similar to the many values that all religions and cultures share. They aren't exclusively religious values. They certainly aren't exclusive humanist values. These belong to all of us. There are a few organizations in the humanist space I want to mention as we near the end here. The American Humanist Association is the preeminent US-based organization that I'm most familiar with and a part of. They define humanism as a progressive philosophy of life that, without theism or other supernatural beliefs, affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. The AHA has dozens of local chapters and affiliates around the country, including ours, the Central Florida Freethought community. There are other national organizations in other countries. The last one I'll share with you is Humanist International. They provide the final definition of humanism I'm going to provide, quote, a democratic and ethical life stance which affirms that human beings have the right and responsibility to give meaning and shape to their own lives. It stands for the building of a more humane society through an ethic based on human and other natural values in the spirit of reason and free inquiry through human capabilities. I want to show you a relatively recent initiative of the American Humanist Association to establish a basic framework and to try to simplify the values of humanism and humanists overall. You might have thought that brevity was a recent invention of social media, but even centuries ago, we like to keep things short and to the point. So the American Humanist Association, which has no sacred text to draw from, came up with the 10 commitments as a survey and guide for principles for living a fulfilling and responsible life. And these commitments reflect a dedication to human welfare, environmental stewardship, and a pursuit of knowledge. And the 10 are critical thinking, empathy, ethical development, peace and social justice, service and participation, humility, environmentalism, global awareness, responsibility, and altruism. They remind and encourage us to approach the world with a thoughtful and open mind and to prioritize empathy and ethical behavior in our interactions. They also emphasize the importance of contributing positively to society, whether through direct service or by advocating for peace and social justice. Additionally, they highlight the significance of being aware of global issues and acting with responsibility and compassion towards all living creatures and the environment. By embracing these commitments, secular humanists strive to lead meaningful lives that contribute to the betterment of humanity and the world at large. I'll close with probably one of the most common questions asked of atheists and humanists. How can you be good or make moral decisions without a belief in God? Let me explain why I think the premise of this question is flawed. The assumption in that question is that a God belief would make my decisions good. So if I'm a believer, would it follow all my actions are good? Don't believers do bad things sometimes? Is someone good and just and moral only when God wants them done? Let's assume first we could all agree on what God wants. Is what I think that what God wants a moral determination? Or is that better described as obedience? I think morality is making moral choice because it causes less harm and does more good. I don't think morality is making the right choice because someone said it was the right choice to make. What if I am wrong about what God wants? What if what I believe God wants me to do is immoral and harmful? Do I do it anyway? Religious dogma can get even well-intended believers into trouble. And of course, by no means would I say non-believers make harmful decisions as well. So if believers can make immoral decisions, and if non-believers can make moral decisions without God belief, I'm not sure God is what's making our decisions moral. Remember this list? These traits are universal. They can be religious values, they can be humanist values too, because they're human values that we can all relate to. In summary, humanism is a philosophy for those in love with life. Humanists take responsibility for their own lives and relish the adventure of being part of new discoveries, seeking new knowledge, exploring new ideas. Instead of finding solace in prefabricated answers to great questions, humanists enjoy the open-endedness of the quest and the freedom of discovery that this journey entails. Humanists take responsibility for our individual lives while being proactive in protecting others and caring for the world that we live in. So thank you so much for coming here today, and I'm happy to take questions if you have any.
Thank you, Jocelyn. That was wonderful. And as she said, we are opening up for some question and answers. So if you have any questions, just raise your hand. I will bring you the mic. Jocelyn, even as you were talking, a question that sparked up for me, you talked about your upbringing, your family, and just some of those influences even through the travel. Can you just talk a little bit more as you look back to even where you are now and has like this life of humanism? What has it really personally meant for you? And how does that make you talked about some of the lists and everything, how does that make you really show up in the world personally?
That's a good question. I have been on my own personal journey. As I mentioned, when I was younger, I would not have necessarily said I'm a humanist. I've come to provide that definition as I've gotten older. When I was younger and I lived in Japan and I lived in Cyprus, I think because I came at it from such a fresh, unencumbered sort of perspective, I am completely comfortable adapting to whatever environment I'm in and being respectful of the environment that I'm in. And I think that was something that came from being raised in that environment. It made me very open to learning about other religions and traditions, but that also, I will say, solidified my position because I met so many wonderful people of faith, of so many different faiths, that it really helped me to feel comfortable in myself because I realized that everyone's on their own individual journey. And as I've gotten older, I've realized it's important for me now to talk about it in a more out way, which is why I'm here today, because I want people to feel comfortable if they're in the same mindset that I'm in.
Wonderful. Any other questions? Yes.
Hi, Jocelyn. I'd like you to comment on the Freethought community and the meetings they offer, which are humanistic in nature. Also, I noticed most of the people in the audience today are women. Do you have an event for women?
Thank you, Dan. And no, I did not place him in the audience, but thank you, Stoic Dan. I will say, before I talk about the Central Florida Freethought community, Stoic Dan runs a Stoics group, and they have meetings all the time, online and in person. And if you want to learn more about Marcus Aurelius and other Stoics, Dan is the person you want to talk to. I am but a layperson with all of that. The Central Florida Freethought community, we have about 30 events a month. We have activism, but we have a lot of social. We have a volunteering event. We go to Second Harvest every month. We've adopted a park. We clean up a road. Every year we do a STEM book drive during the holiday season because we all have time off during the holidays. I will say that the Freethought Florida Conference is coming up next March, which happens every 2 years. And all of the speakers, except for 2 at this point, are women. But we also have a secular women's group that meets at least twice a month now. We have 2, Stitch and Bitch is the name of the event. It's a crafting, art-based sort of social event, but you don't have to do anything but show up and be willing to have good conversation. And then we have monthly dinners with the secular women as well. Thank you, Dan.
I just had a question because I'm a humanist, but can you be religious and a humanist?
Yes. There are people who identify as religious humanists, and if you do some research, basically there is so much similarity as far as how to approach life. We find that it is very comfortable for some people to identify as a religious humanist. Obviously, there are some differences because you get into conversations about the afterlife and other things, but as far as the practical, from my perspective, going out and living your life, they are identical.
I've got one for you.
Oh no.
No. This is all very neutral. I've been looking forward to this session, probably. I've been to several of these. I've been looking forward to this one the most because I'm so fascinated with, sorry about that. Stop. Okay, so I've got training as what's called a spiritual companion. which essentially is a practice of deep listening. And I'm more drawn to being a companion to people who don't have a belief in God. So maybe spiritual but not religious.
Right?
In humanism, is there ever any talk of the spirit or the soul?
First of all, when you talk about is there a conversation, secular humanists tend to view the soul as more of a metaphor for the unique abilities and things that make us human. So you will hear people conversationally refer to the soul or the spirit, and it more is if you get into the science of it, from my perspective, is a product of our brain and the how we function in it, our brain chemistry, all of that. There are people in our local group who I know identify as spiritual but non-religious. In general, I would say that we have a spectrum of people who are in our community. There is no hard requirement as far as you have to deny everything to enter the room. No, it's nothing like that. But you will find that, again, our community is a safe space for people to discuss these topics. And you may find some people have very strong opinions on one side or the other, but there isn't necessarily a hard answer for that, beyond that.
Thank you.
If that's helpful.
Yeah.
Any others? Jocelyn, I do have a question. I'm thinking about scale. About how many, do you know the population of people that identify as humanists, maybe here locally or?
Well, again, we had all those words up on this slide, and we see polls across the United States ranging from the low end of 20% of the population of the United States to 40% plus. And so I think that the word humanist is not as used as non-religious, right? I think a lot of people, I personally think a lot of people in the United States would identify as non-religious if you could get them in a quiet room by themselves. And that's a different conversation. But the thing is that humanists, no, I think it's a small percentage. Here in the Central Florida area, we have about 3,000 on our mailing list, and as I said, we have about 30 events a month. We're very active. If you look across the United States, you're gonna find humanist groups throughout the country. But relative to Christianity, the number of actual buildings and meetings are gonna be a lot less. I don't have a specific number for humanists, but that's a good question. That's part of the reason why we're trying to educate people. I do believe people need community. I think that people of faith and no faith, such as myself, we all need community, and we need people to be with us. I think COVID-19 was a real reminder of why community is so incredibly important. And I sincerely hope that the people who are identifying as non-religious will seek out more community. Just because you bowl with somebody doesn't necessarily mean that you believe in the same things. But if you can find a group of people that you align with, I think there is joy and comfort in that. And I'm encouraging people to find those communities.
I have another question.
Sure.
I'll keep asking questions.
I'll stand here as long as you keep asking questions.
As a chaplain, sometimes early on, I mistakenly would walk into a room, a patient's room, and I say, "Hi, I'm Christian," and they'd say, "Hey, I'm Jewish," and that was my name.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if you or when you maybe identify as, "Hey, I'm a humanist," if someone might ask, or however you might introduce. What's often the response? How do people respond, or their reaction? Is it they know about it, or they're more of like, "Hey, what is that?" Or what's the response?
That's a good question. First of all, I am very much a go along sort of person. You're gonna find different people in our group. Some are gonna be more out and they wanna open up with the atheist word, which causes some people to just go, whoa. I always would open up with humanism, because I think it sparks a conversation. I think a lot of people don't know what humanism is. They don't have a clear definition. And that allows a space to have a conversation. And I think if you open a conversation with something that causes people to be defensive or have isms, that immediate opinion of you, I think that's a way to close doors. And my goal is to demystify and to, when I'm out doing it, for me, interfaith work, I want to demystify the atheist, the humanist. I don't want us to appear to be quote unquote bad people. We are volunteering. We are going to the soup kitchens. We are donating our money. We are doing the work across the country. We are doing it hand in hand with all of the communities. And the thing is that until recently, I don't think it was necessary to be out. You could just go and do it and everybody would do their good works together. But we're in a unique, seemingly political climate where I think, in my opinion, the non-religious people need to stand up and say, hey, we're here and we're doing work, and please don't disown us as you work on these projects you're working on, to put it politely. And so, yeah, I am now opening up with humanism, and I think it does create a conversation, as opposed to using the atheist word. And then there's also agnostic, right? You have, a lot of people will use the word agnostic, but when you talk about atheism and agnosticism, you're talking about belief and knowledge. I don't know anything really for sure, so I'm agnostic. I have not had an experience in my life that has caused me to believe, so I would define myself as an agnostic atheist in reality. And that's a spectrum, but I think most people don't realize the actual language.
Wonderful. Any final questions? Any more?
No.
Here and then.
Let her take a peek. Do the joke.
You wanna hear the joke?
Rand is very funny.
When I walk into a room, I say I'm black, cause that's my name too.
Okay.
You're Christian,
We
I'm
should
black.
tag team.
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, I mean, I thought it was funny.
Tough one to follow. Just wondering if you could speak to the history of the humanist movement and organization in the Central Florida Interfaith Council. It's wonderful that you're there and a part of that. And it seems a bit different, I think, when people see the roster for this program that y'all are here. I'm just wondering if you guys were an original part of that organization or kind
Sure,
of a
no,
timeline.
I can talk about it. So I founded, with David Williamson, we founded the Central Florida Freethought community. And Jim Coffin, who was the executive director of the Interfaith Council of Central Florida, wrote an editorial in the Orlando Sentinel. And I saw that editorial and it spoke to me. And I said to David, we need to reach out to Jim. We need to get to know him. I think this is somebody that we could be friends with. And so we reached out, and it happened over several years of having coffees, of having dinners, of spending time. Jim at the time was running a discussion group on the other side of town from us, and when we would go and be a part of this discussion group. And from that, we were able to, become really good friends with Jim. Jim came to our wedding. He's a wonderful, beautiful man, and he just, I can't explain how warm and happy Jim, when you spend time with Jim Coffin, he's just a great man. And so he invited us to be a part, in part because we had spent so much time with him, and he also invited us to get to know the other clergy members on the council. And I think it was through that time that we spent getting to know them that they invited us to be a part of the council. And it is very unique for the United States. Very few interfaith councils in the United States have secular humanism as a part of it. It was a serious conversation had by the Interfaith Council here, and I think it has served all of us well. I think the only way you build a bridge is to bring the whole town together. The only way we're going to be able to do the best good works possible is if we all work together, and that's what we're doing at the Interfaith Council. Thank you.
So you serve on the Traditions Council.
I do.
And David Williamson serves on as one of our board of directors. So,
Yes.
Very, very well in terms of contribution. Any final questions? All right, can you tell us how they can get more information or resources?
Yes, I have put some information on the tables as you walk out. The 10 commitments are on a little card if you want to take those home. Just as there's also the American Humanist Association websites on there. Our website's on there, as well as we have another table card up there for some information about our organization overall, in case you're interested in learning more. So, thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming. If you didn't sign our attendance sheet, we'd love to get your name and information and recognize that you showed up. And now you can clap for your last one.